August 23, 1939. Hitler and Stalin signed a pact that stunned the world. Two arch-enemies slicing Poland in half, driven by fear and hatred more than strategy. This was the moment that set in motion the catastrophic duel at the heart of the fear and hatred that lost Hitler the war. But how did a partnership built on mutual contempt spiral into a suicidal gamble that doomed the Nazi Empire and reshaped the world order? The answer begins with the night they became allies, if only on paper. In the late hours of August 23, 1939, two foreign ministers, Vyacheslav Molotov for the Soviet Union and Joachim von Ribbentrop for Nazi Germany, sat across a long table in Moscow. The air was thick with suspicion, but the ink on the documents was real. Their signatures, placed below the official seals, bound two bitter rivals into a pact that redrew the map of Eastern Europe overnight. The agreement, known publicly as a non-aggression treaty, included a secret protocol. This hidden clause spelled out, in precise language, how Poland and the Baltic states would be carved into German and Soviet zones. The dividing line ran along the Narev, Vistula, and San rivers, slicing through cities, villages, and centuries of history. The German and Soviet copies of the protocol, locked away in their respective archives, matched almost word for word. Both sides agreed not only on the borders, but on the need for absolute secrecy. The maps attached to the protocol were marked in heavy pencil, the new boundaries traced over the old. In Berlin, Ribbentrop's staff prepared translations, while in Moscow, the Politburo reviewed the Russian original. These documents would remain hidden from the world for decades, surfacing only after the collapse of the Soviet Union. No handshake could erase the contempt behind the deal. Molotov and Ribbentrop exchanged stiff nods, aware that the ink binding their countries was as fragile as the paper it stained. The secret protocol gave the Soviet Union control over eastern Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and later, Lithuania. Germany claimed the western half of Poland. The two regimes agreed to coordinate their moves, but neither trusted the other for a moment. The border drawn on paper soon became a line of tanks and soldiers. Within a fortnight, German troops marched into Poland from the west, and Soviet forces advanced from the east. The fate of millions was decided by a few strokes of a pen, setting in motion a chain of occupation, deportation, and violence. The world would not learn the full truth of these secret agreements until long after the war had ended. But on that August night in Moscow, the borders of Europe were quietly rearranged by fear, ambition, and mutual loathing. Joseph Stalin never mistook partnership for trust. Even as the ink dried on the pact with Hitler, Stalin's contempt for his new ally simmered beneath the surface. He was no stranger to the words that had filled Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. Soviet intelligence translated and summarized the pages for him, highlighting passages that dripped with hatred for Bolshevism and calls for Soviet destruction. Stalin's aides recalled his cold fury as he read those reports, sometimes circling phrases or scribbling notes in the margins of internal memos, not out of curiosity, but calculation. He knew exactly what Hitler thought of him, and he returned the feeling in kind. The practical consequences of this mutual loathing played out almost immediately in the territories the Pact had handed to Moscow. In the forests outside Smolensk, the NKVD received orders to eliminate Polish prisoners of war. In the spring of 1940, over 20,000 Polish officers, intellectuals, and community leaders were executed at sites like Katyn, Mednoye, and Kharkiv. The killings were methodical, each name checked against a list, each bullet a bureaucratic act. Soviet files, later uncovered, recorded the orders in chilling detail, The signatures of Beria and the stamp of the Politburo sealed their fate. These massacres were not simply acts of war, they were statements of ideological contempt. Stalin saw the Polish elite as a threat to Soviet control, just as Hitler saw Slavs and Jews as obstacles to his own vision. In the new Soviet zone, mass deportations followed. Families were woken in the night, loaded onto trains, and sent east. The boundaries drawn in Moscow became lines of terror on the ground, mirrored by the German atrocities in the West. Stalin's cold calculation lay in thinking he could control the chaos he unleashed. He believed he could outmaneuver Hitler, using brutality as a tool of statecraft. But beneath every order, every signature, ran the certainty that this alliance was only a pause before the next great betrayal. In the shadows of the Pact, the seeds of future paranoia and violence were already taking root. The German army's triumph in France left Berlin drunk on victory. In June 1940, Hitler stood at Compiègne, the site of Germany's humiliation in 1918, and watched the French delegation sign their surrender in the very same railway carriage. The speed and brutality of Blitzkrieg shocked the world. Paris had fallen in 6 weeks. Now, with the British army barely escaping at Dunkirk and Churchill refusing peace, Hitler saw a new opportunity. He dictated a note to London, offering terms, but the reply was silence. To Hitler, this meant only one thing: Britain would hold out as long as it had hope of help from the East. In the war rooms of Berlin, maps of Europe were redrawn with swift, confident strokes. Hitler's generals pushed for a focus on the Mediterranean or a renewed air assault on Britain. But Hitler's gaze shifted east. He believed that smashing the Soviet Union would not only secure Germany's future, but force Britain to the table. In a speech to his military commanders, he insisted that Germany's destiny lies in the East. Diplomatic files from the summer of 1940 show Hitler's growing impatience with the Soviet partnership. Resource charts, prepared by his economic advisors, revealed Germany's hunger for oil, grain, and minerals, resources locked in the Soviet heartland. The German High Command began quietly shifting divisions eastward, even while the public face of diplomacy remained intact. On July 31, 1940, Hitler convened a secret meeting at the Berghof. The minutes record his words: "The sooner Russia is smashed, the better." Orders went out to begin planning for a massive campaign, Operation Barbarossa. From that moment, the machinery of war pivoted. Trains loaded with men and equipment rolled east, while Berlin's diplomats, still bound by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, sent carefully worded notes to Moscow. Hitler's vision of empire demanded the conquest of Soviet territory. The stage was set for a collision that would decide the fate of Europe. October 1940 brought a telegram from Tokyo to Moscow, its message stark and direct. Richard Sorge, the Soviet spy embedded in the German embassy, reported that Berlin had informed its diplomats Germany would attack the Soviet Union in the spring of 1941. Preparations, Sorge warned, were already underway. The cable landed on Stalin's desk and joined a growing pile of reports. Soviet border guards along the western frontier had already filed their own alerts. They noted new German airfields, rail lines crowded with tanks, and columns of troops moving east through the snow. By early 1941, the GRU's Prague station estimated that up to 60 German divisions were shifting toward the Soviet border. Army attachés in Bucharest and Warsaw echoed the same story. German forces were massing, and the window for a surprise attack was narrowing. Inside the Kremlin, these warnings fueled arguments rather than action. Stalin read Sorge's message, then scrawled a note in the margin. Disinformation, English provocation. He believed the British, desperate to drag the Soviets into war, were feeding Moscow lies through every possible channel. Even when Soviet intelligence reported that the German High Command had set a date, June 22nd, for the invasion, Stalin brushed it off. He told the Politburo, "Hitler is not such an idiot." In Stalin's view, Hitler would never risk an Eastern war while Britain remained undefeated in the West. Politburo notes from the spring of 1941 show that Stalin's skepticism ran deep. Each new cable, whether from Sorge, the border, or Berlin, was treated with suspicion. Orders to the Red Army remained vague. Mobilization was delayed. Soldiers along the frontier were told to avoid any provocation. Stalin's refusal to believe the mounting evidence left the Soviet Union exposed. When the storm finally broke, it caught the Red Army unprepared, and the cost of that disbelief would be measured in millions of lives. On the evening of May 10, 1941, a single-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110 lifted off from an airfield near Augsburg, Germany. At the controls sat Rudolf Hess, Hitler's longtime deputy and one of the most trusted men in the Nazi hierarchy. He carried no official orders, no entourage, just a map, a parachute, and a head full of secrets. Hess had plotted a course across the North Sea, aiming for the Scottish lowlands and the estate of the Duke of Hamilton. He believed, or at least claimed, that he could broker a peace between Germany and Britain, bypassing Hitler's inner circle and the foreign ministry entirely. British radar picked up the lone aircraft as it crossed the coast. Anti-aircraft batteries fired, but Hess pressed on. Near Eaglesham, south of Glasgow, he bailed out and tumbled into a field, twisting his ankle on landing. Local farmers found him first, followed by the Home Guard. When questioned, he identified himself as Alfred Horn, but soon revealed his true identity to British authorities. MI5 quickly took him into custody, shuttling him through a maze of safe houses and interrogation rooms. The Duke of Hamilton, who had met Hess briefly at the 1936 Olympics, was summoned for questioning, but denied any prior arrangement. Inside Whitehall, the news triggered confusion and alarm. British officials scrambled to manage the fallout, issuing terse statements and sealing Hess off from the press. MI5 files from those days fill hundreds of pages. Interrogation transcripts, medical reports, and internal memos, all stamped with layers of secrecy. The British government insisted Hess acted alone, a rogue envoy with no mandate from Berlin. But the real reasons for his flight, and what he hoped to achieve, remain clouded by speculation. As Hess sat in British custody, the world's capitals buzzed with rumors. In Moscow, the event would soon take on a life of its own. In Moscow, the news of Hess's capture landed like a dropped mask. Soviet radio operators intercepted British broadcasts, while NKVD analysts scoured every rumor and official denial for hidden meaning. Diplomatic cables from London described British officials scrambling to explain the flight, insisting Hess was a lone madman. Stalin, hunched over these reports in the Kremlin, saw something far darker. He told the Politburo that Hess's journey must have been arranged in advance with the English. The official minutes record his words. "Do not trust the British. This is a provocation." The Soviet press followed his lead. Pravda's headlines hinted at secret talks between London and Berlin, warning of a plot to turn Hitler east and leave the USSR isolated. Internal memos from the NKVD circulated between Molotov, Beria, and the General Staff, summarized British denials but flagged the possibility of a secret Anglo-German understanding. Each new telegram from the embassy in London was read with suspicion. The Foreign Office's embarrassment, the Duke of Hamilton's denials, even the silence from Churchill, all became evidence in the Kremlin's eyes. In early June, the General Staff's threat assessments began to shift. Reports of German divisions massing on the border were reviewed, but Stalin's orders reflected his growing obsession with British duplicity. He instructed the GRU to prioritize surveillance of British contacts and warned against any military move that could be seen as a provocation. The army remained on partial alert, but full mobilization was still forbidden. Soviet vulnerability deepened, not from lack of information, but from a leadership convinced that the real danger lay in the shadows of foreign intrigue, not at the gates. At 3:15 a.m. on June 22, 1941, the silence along the western frontier of the Soviet Union shattered. Over 3 million German soldiers surged across the border, supported by nearly 4,000 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, and more than 2,000 aircraft. Operation Barbarossa had begun, the largest land invasion in history. Hitler's war machine, divided into 3 massive army groups, north, center, and south, drove toward Leningrad, Moscow, and Ukraine with a single goal: total destruction of the Soviet state. The first hours brought chaos and collapse. Luftwaffe bombers hammered Soviet airfields from the Baltic to the Black Sea, destroying more than 1,000 planes on the ground before sunrise. Panzer divisions sliced through weak points in the Red Army's defenses, encircling entire Soviet armies within days. By the end of June, hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers had been captured, their columns stretching for miles along dusty roads as prisoners of war. Reports from the front spoke of entire Soviet divisions vanishing, command posts abandoned, radios silent. German officers described the advance as a drive through a broken door. Cities like Minsk fell in a matter of days, while the Red Army's scattered resistance was crushed or bypassed. In Berlin, Hitler watched the situation maps with growing satisfaction. He believed the campaign would be over in a matter of weeks. Orders flowed from his headquarters, pushing the generals to keep moving, to accept no delays. The Wehrmacht's confidence soared as their columns pressed deeper into Soviet territory, but the vastness of the land and the first hints of logistical strain began to surface. Behind the front, Soviet factories and railways burned, and refugees clogged every road east. The war Hitler had unleashed was moving fast, but already, the limits of German reach were beginning to show. Behind the front lines, the war's outcome was shaped by weaknesses that ran deeper than any battle map. In Berlin, Dr. Theodor Morell's medical diaries recorded a steady stream of injections and pills administered to Hitler. Methamphetamine, known as Pervitin, was delivered by needle several times a week, sometimes more during periods of crisis. On the eve of Operation Barbarossa, Morell's notes list multiple stimulant doses, along with caffeine and vitamin cocktails. Hitler's reliance on these drugs grew as the campaign dragged on, with some days seeing as much as 8 milligrams of methamphetamine in his system. Contemporary accounts describe erratic moods, bursts of energy, and sudden exhaustion. While historians debate how much these substances warped his judgment, the medical records reveal a leader increasingly propped up by chemicals rather than counsel. In Moscow, a different kind of self-destruction was underway. The Red Army's officer corps had been gutted by Stalin's purges. Between 1937 and 1938, more than 30,000 officers were arrested or executed, leaving the Soviet military stripped of experience just as the German invasion began. Internal army reports from the summer of 1941 detail confusion at every level. Divisions without commanders, orders delayed or misunderstood, and entire units immobilized by fear of making the wrong decision. Stalin's paranoia had hollowed out his own defenses, ensuring that even the best intelligence could not be acted on quickly. Yet the war's balance was not decided by leadership alone. Across the Soviet Union, factories packed up machinery and workers and moved east, out of the reach of German bombers. American Lend-Lease ships unloaded trucks, boots, and food in Murmansk and Vladivostok. By the end of 1941, more than 400,000 tons of Allied aid had reached Soviet soil. These trains and convoys, tracked in shipping manifests and government ledgers, became lifelines as the Red Army struggled to regroup. The human cost of these hidden variables, chemical dependency, political terror, and industrial relocation, would shape every decision that followed, binding personal flaws and structural chaos to the fate of the war. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched the largest invasion in history against the Soviet Union, a decision shaped by years of distrust, secret treaties, and personal animosity. Documents like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and its secret protocol show how fear briefly made Hitler and Stalin uneasy allies, while NK-5D and Wehrmacht files reveal the brutality each inflicted on Poland. Despite dozens of intelligence warnings, Stalin dismissed the threat, convinced by previous betrayals and the mystery of Rudolf Hess's solo flight to Britain. Medical diaries and military reports confirm that both leaders' personal flaws, Hitler's drug dependency and Stalin's purges, amplified the disaster. Yet, the full motives behind Hess's mission and Stalin's late mobilization remain partly hidden in classified archives. The collapse of Nazi Germany led to a world divided by the Cold War, a lasting consequence of their failed duel. The evidence is clear. Mutual fear and hatred between Hitler and Stalin did not just shape their decisions, they doomed an empire and redrew the map of the modern world.